Hi everyone, I am JJ and I work as a literary agent. Some of the things that I notice a lot when going through submissions or meeting with people at conferences is that people don't actually know what genre to label their book as, either genre or target audience. So I wanted to go through a little kind of how-to, I guess, of how to place your book into a genre, because I know it's really hard. Like, I'm an author too. If you've watched any of my other videos, you know I write. And genres can be so vague sometimes that it's really hard to know exactly where to put your book. We're going to start with the most obvious one. The most obvious genre, I think, is fantasy. And I say that hesitantly because spec-fic has taken to cover a lot of things. If you are unfamiliar with that term, it's speculative fiction, which is a blanket term to cover anything that is a speculation on things that are or could be, right? So technically, dystopian fiction falls under speculative fiction. If it's based in our world, but one thing is a little bit off, like it's an alternate universe, but it's most of our technology, all of our stuff, it's spec-fic. The hard thing about spec-fic is that you can say that you're selling speculative fiction, and even though you're telling the truth, it might not be the best genre to actually help you know what you're looking at here. So let's start with fantasy. A fantasy novel of any age group, is a book based in a world that is completely created out of your own head. So classic fantasy is Lord of the Rings. You get an entire world with different breeds and races, and it's not our world. There are some similarities, right? Like, you'll still find like your typical town setup of, there's an inn and people ride horses because horses are really good for riding, and we also decided that this sharp object could be really good for slashing, so we have swords here. But there's entire other things, like there are wizards and there are hobbits and elves and orcs and all over the place. Dragons are normal, like giant spiders, mountain trolls, so on and so forth, right? You get these creatures that get so twisted because of something taking root in their heart and the fact that they hid away under a mountain for hundreds of years and there was an evil ring, so it's a completely made-up world, completely new. Granted, of course, if you look into the mythology of Middle-earth, the reason he calls it Middle-earth is because you get this in-between time between the start of our world and the world as we know it. But so technically that does fall under spec-fic because it's a time in our world's past. But because of the nature of it and the fact that these creatures, as far as we know, don't exist in our world as we know it. There isn't technology like we know it, like a Palantir doesn't actually exist. Things like that make it fantasy. So typical elements of a fantasy novel include magic and adventure stories, right? Like, your typical fantasy is going to be an adventure or a quest to go do things in a world that is not our own. And then you get sci-fi. Science fiction technically looks at its speculative fiction using science. Okay, so you have science from our world that is taken to the nth degree. So you're studying things like gene development and mutations and asking the question, what happens if we take this too far? What happens if we go out and explore the rest of the known universe? So spaceships. A huge element of sci-fi science fiction is aliens and space travel. So generally, if you advertise your novel as a sci-fi novel, people are going to expect there to be aliens and space travel. This is why, even though things like Captain America for Marvel, it counts as sci-fi because it's like, how could we create a super soldier using science, right? Even though that's there, Captain America is not marketed as a sci-fi movie, whereas Guardians of the Galaxy definitely is, because you get space travel and aliens and all of the weird things you expect in sci-fi in Guardians of the Galaxy, including your token green girl. Sorry, Gamora, you're not just a token green girl, but you are a girl with green skin, and therefore kind of fall into that trope. Even though you're really cool, and I hate to compare you to the token green girl. Then coming back into our world, there is near future sci-fi, so that's a branch off of science fiction. That is our world with scientists underground or something who are making mutations off of science and technology that is much closer to our current reality. So robots, so like looking at Doctor Who, this would be the Cybermen. People created technology designed to help humanity, and it went too far, right? Still has those weird sci-fi elements, but you're not going to find magic. You're going to find a scientific explanation, which is why sometimes it bugs me that sci-fi and fantasy are tossed into the same areas. But at the same time, I get it. Usually, if you like one, you also like the other. So, moving into more realistic fiction, right? You get your crime suspense, you get mystery novels, you get thrillers. Those are all of my favorite genres. Looking at the differences between those, I wrote a blog post about this that I'll put down in the description, but the difference between a thriller and a crime fiction novel is that a thriller is specifically looking at events that involve multiple countries, usually. So it's things like espionage or political things. Granted, there are times that you get like psychological thrillers, and those are a little bit different. Those fall into more of the like serial killer kind of situation where it's like a federal case going across lines. But typically a thriller is political or espionage based, right? So you're going to have secret societies and spies going off and doing things. They can still be high action, high intensity, but they're not going to be the same sort of book as, say, a crime fiction novel where you're following criminals or you're following a detective who has to go stop the criminals, or as with Runaway by Harlan Coben, you're following a random civilian who accidentally gets tied up in a bunch of criminal schemes, right? So the difference there is that you're focused on one individual crime happening or a crime family that happens, and either you're following a detective trying to stop the crime from happening or trying to catch the killer after crime has already happened, or you're following the perspective of the criminal as they commit these crimes. So what does that mean about mystery novels? Because obviously, again, you get some crossover there of, in order to build suspense, one of the best ways to do that is to withhold information from a reader. So a suspenseful novel can be a mystery, or it can be a crime fiction novel, or it can be a thriller, right? This is why they all fall under suspense, but you also get some mysteries that are not as suspenseful. And these are usually called cozy mysteries. There are still going to be elements of suspense because they're going to keep you turning pages, but these are going to be your more lighthearted. Like, there's still probably a murder, but the detective is going to be a woman who leaves her knitting club because the murder happened right outside and she sees this dead body, and she and her cat go solve the mystery together. So you get those softer, a little bit fluffier, lighter-hearted mysteries. But then you can also get, like, Criminal Minds type mysteries where you're following a high-intensity, like, detective story as they go through different things. So if you have a detective in your story, you're probably writing crime fiction or mystery. You might be writing a crime fiction mystery. But at the same time, if that detective is discovering something that's overseas or has huge political overtones, then it might be a thriller. But take some time to dig into those if you write any of those things, because I don't want to pick up a book as an agent that is labeled as a thriller and then realize, no, this isn't a thriller, this is a crime novel, right? Like, I mean, I'd be happy about that. I love crime novels. But at the same time, it's false advertising. If I'm looking for espionage and it's following a mob boss, I might be a little confused. Other genres that people tend to mix up. Upmarket fiction. This is something that a lot of people don't know about. This is something that I even recently just learned about. Upmarket fiction is current fiction written in an older style. so that it reads and feels like a classic novel that you would have to read and study in high school. You can have upmarket YA. You can have upmarket adult novels. You can have upmarket fantasy, crime, suspense, whatever, right? You can have an upmarket written thing in any of those natures, but if you're writing upmarket, please label it as upmarket, because there are some agents, myself included, who don't necessarily enjoy that. And it hurts me to say this, but if an agent doesn't enjoy the way that you wrote your book, even if it's well written, even if it's a great book, if we can't get 100% behind it, we're probably not the right agent for you. Which is hard because we all have our own individual tastes, but that's also why there are so many different literary agents out there. I'm sure eventually you will find the right one for your book if you just keep looking. All right. Age group. This is a hard one, especially because right now there's sort of this emerging age group that isn't quite out yet, but that is starting to break into the market. Typically in the past, we have middle grade novels, which fall into the children's juvenile fiction category. Middle grade is anyone who has a protagonist from ages of 9 to essentially 13, right? If you're writing for a 9-year-old, 9 or 10-year-old, put your protagonist higher. Put your protagonist at 11 or 13, somewhere in there, because especially kids love to look up to where they're going to be, right? They want to be cool like that older person. So if you put your protagonist at a higher age group than your target audience, as long as it's within a few years, you'll actually be doing a better thing than if you were to write specifically for your age group. Young adult novels do the same thing, because that covers everyone from about 14, 15 to 18. Okay, so this is why you find so many like high school dramas about 18, 17-year-olds, right? Those are YA novels. They're written for high schoolers and people just going out of high school. Even if they are not taking place in a high school, it's like even if you're writing a fantasy novel, having your protagonist at 16, 17, 18 is a great age group for that reader because it's on the higher end. And that brings me to new adult. Okay, this is that new kind of age group coming out. New adult novels are written for people in the age group of those who just got out of college, right? So anyone from like 18 to 25 falls into the new adult age group. There aren't a ton of novels out for that right now, but we're starting to see that trend come in. And that's one of those things where if you write a novel right there, you might have to market it as adult. You might have to, honestly, if you market it to agents as new adult, you'll probably have the best luck. But if they have to change your target audience on your proposal to be adult, this is wise, because it's sort of emerging. It's almost here, but it's not quite here yet. It's not established yet. And so, and the reason that this happened is because with the shift in the nature of the economy and how the patterns of people coming home after college have shifted, you get this new emerging adulthood section of society where, those people no longer can't relate to adults who are 30, 40-year-old protagonists in these other books, but they're also too old for YA. So we're looking for those new books that are able to meet that age group exactly where they are in their stage of life, dealing with the things like, how do you rent a first apartment? I just fell in love, I think I'm going to get married, sort of things in our world. Anyway, so while you're deciding on your genre, also figure out your age group, because if you market your book to me as a middle grade novel, but then it reads as upmarket YA, I'm not going to take it as a middle grade novel, right? Even though your protagonist is 13. You have to write with a certain tone for certain age groups. Keep that in mind as you write. Anyway, this also brings me to things like women's fiction or romance novels. I am less familiar with those, but there is a difference between women's fiction and romance. Some genres, some publishers will put them kind of together. It just kind of depends on the publishing house, but look into both of those if you're writing a book aimed at women, because you might find that it's a little bit different than you think it is. Same thing with a memoir. A memoir is not just an autobiography. Look into the differences between a memoir and an autobiography, because one is engaging and the other is more like a history textbook, just of a specific person's life. So, I hope this helps you in your writing world attempts as you go out into the world and try to get your books published. Please, please, please put your books in the right genres. It helps tremendously helping agents get it to the right person in their agency, or even just knowing where to send it. Because if you have the wrong genre, that also helps agents know, hey, this person didn't do the research all the way that they needed to, and they might not be ready for publication, and that's not something you want them to ever have to think or say. So, good luck. I wish you well. Until next time, I'll see you then. Bye!